When I first set out to make a router table, my first thought was just to make kind of a simple stand. But I'm of kind of the mindset that if I'm going to make something this big, and well, this is going to be the biggest project I make all year, I'm sure, that I might as well do it right and get all the features in it that I want. So this week on the router table saga, I finished up the top and made this really cool fence. I've got a miter slot in the front that'll hold my table saw miter gauge. The fence clamps onto the sides and slides wherever I want it, and it's got a split fence in the front that I can move to depending on the size of the bits that I want to use. I've also put in a T-track here if I want to include some feather boards and stop blocks and that sort of thing. There's a lot of different ways that you can make a top for a router table. Mostly what you want is something that is sturdy. I'm using 3/4 inch melamine and 3/4 inch plywood. The easiest thing you can do is just simply drill a hole through the top of your router table big enough that you can fit router bits through it, and then you would just mount your router directly underneath. The main drawback to doing it that way is that you have to keep reaching underneath here if you want to change bits each time, and that can kind of be a hassle. An improvement is to cut a larger opening in here and drop down in a thinner insert plate. This is the part of the project that, well, I decided to splurge on a bit and buy an aftermarket insert plate. I did a lot of research on insert plates and looked at all different brands and tried to figure out what was going to work best for me, and I decided to go with the Craig insert plate. I like it because you don't have to cut a rabbet in the top of your table and drop it in just perfectly. You can cut all the way through the top of your table, and then you level it with these little levelers. I'm going 35 inches wide by 26 inches deep. And I've cut out this 3/4 inch sub base, the plywood, about 1/8 of an inch bigger all the way around. And that's so when I get this all mounted to my cabinet, I can take a flush trim bit on my router and even all of this up. I've got my plate perfectly centered on my table. Now I'm just going to trace around it. And I'll trace out this plate again on this MDF. Getting the plate to fit perfectly in that hole is going to be critical. So I'm just going to keep sanding and filing down the edges right to that line and just keep testing it until I get it. Alright, I think I've got a fit. In case you were wondering, this is the stand off of my old table saw, but it works perfectly for this. Now I can set my template on top of the melamine and line it up with the line that I drew. And clamp it down. I've put a flush trim bit in my router with a top bearing. And that gives me a perfect hole for my plate. Now all I need to do is cut out this sub base, the plywood piece, and I'm going to cut it larger. And the reason I want to make this cut in the plywood bigger is because these leveling plates I'm going to attach just to the melamine. So I've marked where these come, and then I've given myself an extra, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch or so, and I'll cut along this line. What I need to do now is attach this sub base. I've screwed the top down to the plywood. Now I can finally go ahead and even out the edges with my flush trim bit. I'm going to make the fence using 3/4 inch plywood. This is going to be the base. This will be the front or the back part of the face, and then I'm going to have a piece of the melamine that is going to attach to that. I've cut this oversized right now. What I need to do first is I need to cut a groove down here so this T-track will fit right down into that notch. Now I've already cut this board down to its final length, which is going to be 36 inches, as well as its backer board, and I also put a notch in here and one for the base. So the base will sit like this, this board will line up with that, and then this front piece will be mounted like that. I have 2 marks set that are equal distance from each side. Now I need to drill that 3/8 inch hole all the way through, and I'm going to do it at the same time that I drill the other half of the face of the fence. So what I'm going to do is just clamp these together and drill all the way through. Now I can take these clamps off, and you can see that there's my holes that'll be on the front face that will hold the bolt and the washer. They'll drop down in there. And I've got some holes that go through the sub face that now I can align the slots. I've made a mark 1 inch from the end of my router and 1 inch from this side of my router so that the whole slot will be 2 inches long. And I just have 3 more to do. And what I've done is I cut out some little 45-degree angle triangles that I'll use to brace the back. And this section right here is where my dust port is going to go for the shop vac. The fence is all glued up now, and I've split this into 2 pieces. So now this piece here is what's going to go on there. I need to cut it in half. I'm not going to do that right now because what I want to do is I want to mount this piece on the top. I've got a couple of blocks of oak that are 2 by 2 and 4 inches long that I'm going to use to make the clamps for the sides. So I'm just going to cut out this little notch up here. Here are my 2 blocks that I cut out, and you'll notice that they've got just this little bit of a curve here, and this is the part that's going to clamp the fence down. One thing I had to do is I had to actually glue on another block up on the top here because, well, I kind of miscalculated the size of this. So only thing I need to do now is I'm going to drill a 3/8 inch hole right straight through this for a bolt. And I'll drill a 3/8 inch hole right in the middle of this little extended part of the base of the fence. And I just want to elongate this hole a little bit so that the block can tip a little bit in there. So I'll just wiggle it back and forth. So now all I need to do is take that shape and a 3/8 inch bolt with a washer on it, and I can run it all the way through like that. And then this will go through this hole. This little part here is what's going to clamp underneath the table, like that. And so I can put a washer on there, and I got a couple of these star knobs that'll clamp down like that. And I've cut these split fences in half, and now I can go ahead and install those. They'll get a washer, 3/8 inch bolt, and a washer and a wing nut on the opposite side. So I can test it out now. These slide nicely and will tighten up in the back, and these knobs will loosen to wherever I need the fence and tighten up nicely. And lastly, I cut a piece of plywood and put a hole in it for my shop vac, which will fit in like that. I'm not sure if I like this system or not, but I've just got it screwed on now in case I want to change it in the future, but it seems to be working all right. I completely forgot about my miter channel that I wanted to install in the table also. So I just did that, and it's the, it works great because I can use my table saw miter gauge. But I was actually kind of happy that I forgot about it because once I had all of this done, it was really easy to route out that groove just by putting my fence up against the router. Of course, I can't use the router table yet because I haven't mounted my router into it. What I'm going to do is I want to try to make a router lift. And that'll be on next week's episode and wrap this all up. Thanks for watching. I will talk to you then.